I would say for the first time, a Prime Minister acknowledged the wonderful job that we do in this country, the job that to be able to be creative and be part of the artisan world. And thank you, Prime Minister, to visit us today and to acknowledge what we do for our country. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Nick. Well, thanks very much to Nick and Carmela for having us here at Taroney Jewellers. I'm very proud that this is in my electorate. What we have here is jewellery being produced that is amongst the best in the world. Barbara Streisand and Celine Dion have sat in that room there and chosen jewellery from here. We have Taroney jewellery worn at every Academy Awards, every Emmy Awards globally. This is something that we should be proud of. And for Nick, this was his one bedroom, I think it was, terrace, when it was bought here in Leichhardt, that is now exporting to the world incredibly high quality product. Taking Australia's natural resources, our diamonds and other gems, our gold, our silver, our extraordinary natural assets, producing something that is unique and beautiful, and creating jobs around the same time. Nick has always insisted on having at least 5 or 6 apprentices come in every year, building up that skills base, that artistry that can make us proud and can adding value. And this successful business is part of the great Australian migrant story. Here in Leichhardt, in the heart of the Italian community, the fact that this was a 1-bedroom terrace, that was the bedroom just behind where the cameras are there, has now, of course, this is just one of the stores here in Australia, but also a presence in Los Angeles and around the world, Japan, exporting to the world. I wanted to come here with Brendan O'Connor, our Minister for Skills, Employment and Training, to very much emphasise that when people speak about skills, including in National Skills Week, often they'll think about plumbers and they'll think about apprentices, but it's about other skills that are needed as well. And I have spoken often during the campaign about a future made in Australia, about ways in which we take our resources and value add and then export to the world as well as for domestic consumption. And this is a great example of it. A business that has employed over the years hundreds of employees. A business that is well run, you can always tell, because when you walk around, when people say to you, I've worked here for 40 years and 35 years, which is what we heard downstairs, that sort of loyalty and pride in the work is something that brings great credit to Australia, and particularly it brings great credit to the Taroney family. And so to Nicola, thank you so much for having us here today. I want to acknowledge the presence as well of Senator Francesco Jacobi, one of the Oceania representatives in the Italian Parliament, who's joined us here as well. A local based here in Sydney, but also based, of course, in Rome and representing this region of the world in the Italian Parliament. I'll hand over to Brendan and then I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prime Minister. Can I thank Nick for inviting us here today? This is a remarkable story, a remarkable business. As the Prime Minister says, it's a place that's created remarkable products, high skill, high quality products to sell not only across this country but to the world. And it all starts here, and we had the great fortune of meeting the apprentices that are downstairs, learning their skills and creating these remarkable pieces of jewellery. We met a number of apprentices, but one story in particular stood out for me, and I think for the Prime Minister, talking with Greg, the youngest apprentice at the establishment, who told his story about what he wanted to do, whether he was going to go to university or whether he could go into the into this really important, highly skilled area of work. And he found himself going to Enmore TAFE, a place not far from here, which actually trains students in this area. But what's the missing ingredient, if you don't have it, is an employer to take on those apprentices at that TAFE. And there are a number of Enmore TAFE students that are here, including Greg. He wanted to work with his hands, he wanted to learn a skill. He said his dad was a tradie. He thought about taking a university path, but he chose a vet path to this place and is now helping to produce remarkable products, as I say, at a very high end. And that story really is a story of the vet sector students across the country. The Prime Minister and I are also here because we want to acknowledge the beginning of National Skills Week. This is a time to celebrate the diverse skills that we have in this country, like the ones that are on display with this company. So, as the Prime Minister said, Nick really is an exemplar as an employer, because not only is he responsible for such remarkable products, he's making sure that young people are able to access his workplace and learn their trade, learn their skills. We've got 4,100 jewellers in this country. When Nick started in this area, there were very few. Most people bought imported jewellery and didn't really think we had the capacity and the skill set. Well, not today. It's clear from coming here how remarkable those products are, and indeed the skills that are there. Can I just finish on this point? It is not a coincidence that the Prime Minister and this government wanted to introduce as the first piece of legislation the Jobs and Skills Australia. That is an independent body advising the government as to what skills are in need now and what skills will we need in the future. That will be advised and informed by employers and unions and universities and the vet sector, state and territory governments. We want to make sure we are able to invest wisely in areas where there are skill shortages. And we know the skill shortages are very significant across the economy, across the labour market, and so it's a priority of the Albanese government to invest in skills, invest in our own workforce, and invest in those students coming through, along with, of course, dealing with the skilled migration pathways. It's really important for employers to get the skills they're crying out for. It's very important that working people have the skills in demand so they have secure jobs and a career progression. And it's also important for consumers, because a skilled labour market is a productive labour market, and a productive labour market means downward pressure on prices. And at a time of relatively high inflation, ensuring a productive, innovative labour market and economy will mean a better standard of living for all Australians. So very happy to be here today. Great to be at this fantastic Australian business. It's an exemplar, and it really is a showcase on National Skills Week. Thanks very much.
Prime Minister,
Thanks very much.
have you received the Solicitor General's advice on that?
Maybe we might just ask questions on the skills stuff first and then go. Sure.
Okay, so the Jobs and Skills Summit,
Yep.
you said in an interview with me that it wouldn't be as ambitious as producing, say, a prices and incomes accord. Is there any danger it could fizzle out a bit like the Rudd 2020 Summit did? It recommended the Henry Tax Review, and that wasn't exactly a shining success.
Well, I point out the Rudd 2020 Summit's the first time anyone heard of the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Pretty significant reform that came out of that process. Look, already I regard it as a success. The fact that you're all here and we're talking about jobs and skills is part of the process of what we are doing here. Making sure that people understand that there are significant skill shortages. If you look at the front page of every newspaper today, many of them are talking about skill shortages and about what's required. That is part of why we're calling the Jobs and Skills Summit, to provide that focus. And I want employers, unions and the non-government sector to get together over the 2 days next week and produce practical outcomes. I don't see it as producing a prices and incomes accord that was a comprehensive plan over a long period of time about a whole range of issues, including Medicare, and it was about a range of the social wage. What I do see though is that it will provide a focus on jobs and skills about how we lift wages, lift profits whilst boosting productivity is the way that we can do it while putting downward pressure on inflation. And I think that engagement that is happening already. Today there will be 4 or 5 forums held around Australia, as there will be all of this week and next week, about jobs and skills. So it isn't just the 2 days in Canberra, it's the other activity which is taking place. And I see it as being very positive. I think the spirit in which people are interacting shows that people want to participate. I know that there are many more people, to the tune of many multiples, want to attend the summit than we can fit onto the invite list. And that to me is a positive thing already that it is producing.
Minister, the New South Wales government are talking about bringing in their own visa to meet the skills demand, the low skilled one. Is that something that you would support?
Well, the Australian government conducts visas in this country in terms of migration, and that hasn't changed. But we want to work with all of the state and territory governments. I'll ask Brendan to make some comments on this as well. But we will have, the day before the Jobs and Skills Summit, we'll have a meeting of the National Cabinet. I've already had constructive discussions about this, including with Dominic Perrottet, and I know that all of the state and territory governments are concerned about the skills shortages. They're a handbrake on business activity. And Daniel Andrews and Dominic Perrottet both wrote to me a little while ago, and that's part of the context of having the Jobs and Skills Summit. But I might ask Brendan.
Thanks, Prime Minister. Well, as the Prime Minister indicated, we're talking to state and territory governments about a whole series of things. Firstly, we're looking at creating the agreement that should have been struck June 30 last year under the previous federal government. It didn't happen. So we're speaking with the skills ministers of all jurisdictions, state and territory, to make sure we get a compact so that we know how we can invest in our existing labour market and make sure we're delivering the skills that employers need. That's the first thing we need to do. Insofar as skilled migration is concerned, we know how important that is to employers. It's not a binary choice. We do understand how important it is, and that's why my ministerial colleagues, Claire O'Neill and Andrew Giles, are working very hard, firstly to unclog the visa application process so we can accelerate those visas in need in the areas of acute skill shortage needs. And of course we're looking at other requirements too. So we are engaged in skilled migration pathways, but we are very clear it's also about investing in our own workforce. It's the combination of making sure we've got skilled migration pathways and a vet sector and a university sector and frankly a school sector that's delivering the skills to our labour market is the key, that partnership, and that will be subject of very lengthy conversations at the Skills Summit. We've had many conversations already, as the Prime Minister indicated, and from my conversations with employer bodies, unions, civil society and others, I understand there's a overlapping interest in these areas. There's a common purpose, there's a sense of goodwill, and I believe in the national interest we'll see some very good outcomes arising out of the summit.
Just further to that one, Mr Prime Minister.
Sure.
Matt Cairn this morning said that we don't need the job summit, to quote him, so we don't need a job summit, we just need to get it done, signing tens of thousands of foreign workers to come into the country. Can I just get a reaction on that?
Well, Dominic Perrottet is very keen to attend and accepted the invitation, as did every single Premier and Chief Minister. You advance the country when there's more collaboration. And I know that the New South Wales Premier, along with all the other Premiers, have all accepted the invitation. I look forward to working with them constructively. You're not going to have a summit on Thursday and Friday and wake up on Saturday and there are no skill shortages. That's not what's going to happen. But what you will do is to provide policy parameters, both in terms of training Australians. I make no apologies for saying that migration is part of the solution, but it's not the only part. Training and giving Australians skills, whether it be young people like young Greg, who we met downstairs, who went to the same high school as my son did, and grew up and still lives in Marrickville, you know, an 18-year-old making his way in the world for what will be a very lucrative career path that he is taking. We want to give Australians those opportunities. We at the same time recognise that the immediate skills shortages need to be dealt with, and we will be dealing with those constructively. But also we need better planning. How is it we've got in this acute circumstance whereby construction managers, civil engineering professionals, early childhood teachers, registered nurses, ICT business, software and applications programmers, electricians, chefs, childcare, aged and disability carers, there are all massive shortages here. This hasn't just happened, and it isn't because of the pandemic, it's because we had a government that was asleep at the wheel for a decade. Now we're going to set up proper structures as well. So you deal with, good government deals with the immediate issues that are confronting governments and businesses at the time, but it also plans, and that's what Jobs and Skills Australia is about. Planning for the future, making sure that we get those training opportunities available, because it takes 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 years in order to train people. And so we're training people for what the jobs of the future look like as well. One of the things I find interesting is that every single manufacturing facility you go into, whether it be here, manufacturing beautiful jewellery, or whether it be glass or other high value construction connected manufacturing, has people on computer screens. You know, the skills have changed. We need to change the training to match those skills. That's one of the things that the Jobs and Skills Summit is doing, making sure that training systems are fit for purpose. Enmore TAFE is the only TAFE facility at the moment in the entire region that is training jewellers, where people can do their apprenticeships. Now there's enormous demand for these jobs. They're well-paid jobs, they're well-paid careers, people are going to continue to want jewellery. How do we fix those issues? So I look forward to all of the state governments participating in the summit.
From the Solicitor General's advice,
Sure.
Can you say what that says, will you be releasing it, and what does it say?
I will be briefed by the Secretary of my department, Glyn Davis, on the advice. My understanding is he has received the advice. I'll be briefed on it this afternoon. I intend to release that advice so that people can see it and be transparent about it. And we will, because my government is an orderly government. We have a cabinet meeting tomorrow. I think politeness and proper process means that they should have access to it. I'll do that, and I intend to release the advice tomorrow. As I said, I haven't had the opportunity because I've been here. It came through while we were downstairs, so I will get briefed on it this afternoon here at the Commonwealth offices, and then it will be considered or released. I don't know that there's any decisions to be made. I'm not sure because I haven't examined it yet by the Cabinet, but I will release it tomorrow in Canberra.
Do you think there should be a broader inquiry into this?
Quite clearly there are real questions to be answered here. There is the question of legality. Now, there hasn't been a suggestion of illegality, but there have been questions raised about how this could occur, how it fits in with the conventions and the normal accountability mechanisms and checks and balances that are there in our parliamentary democracy. And they are matters that need to be considered. I'll await and consider the advice properly. I will release it publicly. I'm giving that commitment so that everyone will have the opportunity to see the advice for themselves. But I would have thought that Australians are concerned that this could ever occur. There's a basic fundamental weakness in checks and balances. If no one knows who the minister is, then how can they be held to account for decisions which are made? That's why there's a need in a parliamentary democracy and in our Westminster system of cabinet government for cabinet to be aware, let alone the Australian people, to be aware of who is responsible for what at any particular time.
On another matter, Prime Minister, your pledge during the campaign to cut electricity bills by $275, is that dead and buried after the price rise we saw after the election, or are you still committed to that?
Well, no. What occurred was that, unbeknownst to the Australian public, again a lack of transparency, the government knew that wholesale prices were going to have considerable increases. They deferred those increases until after the election campaign, and then they went up. Our commitment is that because of our policies, they will drive down energy prices. We stand by the modelling which we released, which is that from a business as usual, as the government, the former government was sitting there for a decade with no structure to encourage investment where it was needed in renewables, and at the same time as it was presiding over the closure of plants like Liddell, that it would reduce power prices. Our policy will reduce power prices, and we stand by that, and we stand by the modelling.
Just going back to the Jobs Summit, on enterprise bargaining reform, what do you think about the old ACTU BCA proposal to have different rules applying to union agreements as a way to speed up the approval system?
Well, enterprise bargaining isn't working, and we know that that's the case. We know that wages haven't been keeping up with inflation, and the difference between the new government and the old government is that the old government of the coalition had a policy of putting downward pressure on wages. They wanted low wages to be a key feature of their economic architecture. They fessed up on that. That's not the Labor government's approach. We want to see wages increase over time, and we want it to occur, though, in a way that is cooperative. I see that there are common interests between unions and employers. It's been a theme of mine for a long period of time. It's a part of my philosophical view around the creation of Infrastructure Australia, the creation of Jobs and Skills Australia. How do we create that common purpose structures? Now, enterprise bargaining is about employers and unions coming to common interests to benefit both. And anything that can do that, I see as very positive.
Prime Minister, just another question. What's the current status of the review of the Darwin report? Will you be making those findings public?
I have said that we will be reviewing the Darwin Port ownership of lease. People would be aware that it was leased out to a company connected very directly with the government of the People's Republic of China. At the time that happened, we opposed it. I was the infrastructure minister, shadow minister at the time, and we were concerned about that, and we expressed our opposition. I've asked for advice, and when we receive it, we of course will make it public.
Coming back to the jobs again, we hear anecdotally at the moment, there's so many jobs, but people aren't taking them. I guess this may come out of the Jobs Summit, but how do we get these people into these jobs? Is it pay? Is it lifestyle? What are some of those answers you're hoping to get?
Look, there are a range of issues that you raised. But one of the things about the unemployment rate being 3.4, and people in employment services I met with in Queensland last week were raising this with me. For a whole lot of long-term unemployed who've been shut out of opportunity, with the tight labour market, it may well be that those opportunities open up for them again. Now, some of that means you need one-on-one support. We need to look at employment services and the way that it's been operating as well, because the advice from both long-term unemployed but also from employment services providers is that the structure that said, okay, if you've made 20 phone calls a week and tick those boxes, that's what it's about. If it hasn't advanced the opportunity for you to get into employment, then that's just a paper shuffling exercise. We need to make sure that no one is left behind, and that means whatever we can do to get long-term unemployed into work with training, we need to do. Sometimes it means that you have a period of training. The people we met downstairs who've made a decision to become apprentices are undertaking work that means that their income isn't as great as it might be if they weren't doing an apprenticeship in the short term. But in the long term, it's an investment in their future, and it's an investment by employers in their future as well. So that's one of the things that the Jobs and Skills Summit needs to analyse and argue through. I think that there's a great deal of common purpose, and that's why bringing people together is worthwhile. Now, some of the things will come out of next Thursday and Friday as concrete proposals going forward, and I hope that that's the case. But also, there's no doubt that that dialogue itself will be useful in providing that medium-term response. And I hope that there's reforms not just coming out of the end of next week, but coming out of the input into Jobs and Skills Australia that will be established, the legislations before the Parliament, and that we start to talk about how we have purpose-built training so that we're filling those jobs, because people are missing out at the moment. The other issue on migration is in some areas, like chefs have been short for years, for decades. Why is it there's still this emphasis on temporary employment? One of the things that I've spoken about often is the importance of permanent employment, giving people a stake in this country. And if we bring people here, giving them that opportunity is something that should be examined as well.
What about pensioners? You know, you've had this suggestion, but it had hurt the budget about allowing pensioners to do more paid work and not lose benefits. Are you going to look at that?
Well, if I said this in the Parliament, Andrew, that I'm pleased that the now opposition that were in government for almost a decade have taken up the suggestion that I made that it needs to be examined in my vision statement that I'm sure you're familiar with, that was done in Brisbane on the ageing population. That's one of the things that I proposed as leader of the opposition. What we do is we have orderly processes, and we will have orderly processes as well about policy development. What we won't do is be in government for a decade, wait till we're in opposition and then come up with it as an idea.
On the visa system, is it important for the government to make it a wider pool of occupations, a wider pool of applicants, so you don't shut out the industries most in need of workers?
Look, I think one of the things that occurred was with the pandemic was that the former government told everyone to leave who was a temporary visa holder, unlike New Zealand, that looked at keeping people there, and that's meant that New Zealand is in a better position than Australia is today. But maybe Brendan might want to comment on that.
Well, just to re-emphasise how important that was, there was an opportunity for us to maintain the temporary visa holders during the course of the pandemic. Now, we know the pandemic had impact, but the design fault of the support of the previous government meant that they either leave or starve. There was no support for employers to provide to temporary visa holders in JobKeeper or JobSeeker. So not only have we had thousands upon thousands of people leave, some of them have had a bad experience and they're not all going to automatically return. So we need to remind ourselves of that when we make policies we have to understand the consequences of them, because that has left a significant hole in our labour market. And that's why, again, there's not one solution, as the Prime Minister said. It's investing in our workforce, investing in our future workforce that are in schools or TAFE or university, and also supplementing that with targeted skilled migration and preferably permanent migration, so there's a sense of ownership and belonging that comes from that.
That it? Thank you. And can I say that my choice in this bloke, someone who's been an immigration minister, someone who's been an employment minister, an IR minister, and in charge of skills and training, you can see why he will have a charge of what's a big responsibility going forward. But I look forward to the ongoing dialogue on the Jobs and Skills Summit, and I thank Nick once again for having us here today.
Thanks.
Thank you.
See you, mate.